Hello map makers, and welcome to the second part of my fantasy map making tutorial. This is the second installment of this series, and the first one covered the making of continents and the basics of getting your map started, detailing your coastlines, and that left us here with this islandish continent place, and hopefully you are at the same place in your map. So with this tutorial, we're going to focus on some of the details that's going to start making this world really come to life. And those are mountains and rivers. Now, I always start with these kind of features because they're the bones of your land. They determine which areas are going to be fertile, which areas are going to be barren, which areas of your continent will be more populated than others, and why. And so they kind of drive the entire society and economic system that your world is going to be based on. So I like to know where they are going to be first, so that everything else makes sense as I add it in later. Alright, so first things first, let's get started with mountains. Now, if, like me, you are either artistically and or technologically challenged, then I'm going to show you an easy way to accomplish this that does not involve drawing bunches of tiny little triangles all over your map. I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop brushes. If you already know how to do this because you've already got a pretty good grasp of Photoshop and how that works, then you can just skip this section. But if not, I'm going to show you a really easy way to create a map using mountains that have already been made for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to DeviantArt. There are so many resources here, and I love to go here for tutorials and for free templates and brushes and things like that. So we're going to look up map brushes. And as you can see, there are so many different options of different map brushes, and the more you explore, the more you'll find, because there's just an endless supply of resources on this website alone. To install your brushes, first find one that's going to suit your map style. And it's a good idea to stay basically within the same style for your map. If you're using, for example, sketchy brushes like these, you wouldn't want to come in and mix something cartoony in with them, or your map's going to look inconsistent. This set of brushes right here in particular are a favorite of mine. I like to use, and as you can see, they've been provided by the artist. And always check and make sure that the artist is okay with you using your brushes and what their requests are as far as you citing their work in yours. So, to install these brushes and use these mountains on my map, all I'm going to do is come down here and download the file. Once you've downloaded the file, make sure you unzip it and open it up, and you're going to see probably a couple different pieces. The file you're most interested in is this one, the .abr file. The ABR file is the one that contains the brushes that are actually going to show up in Photoshop. So, pull out your Photoshop file, and depending on whether you're Mac or using Windows, there's different ways to find this folder. I'm hoping you can do that. So open your brushes folder, and you're just going to drop the ABR file into your brush file. That's it. Just drop it right there, no problem. And now it is loaded into Photoshop. Now to open it in Photoshop, you go up here to your Brushes tab, click that little symbol there, and you're going to either click Load Brushes, or it'll appear down here in the list of brushes that you have dropped into that brushes file. So you can see here it is down here, SR, Sketchy Cartography, that is it. You'll click that, and make sure you press Append, not necessarily OK, because you don't want to replace all of your brushes. So just click Append, and then when you scroll down through all of your brushes, I've got quite a lot downloaded here, you will find that brush set in with all of your others. So here they are down here. Okay, so mountains. Now there are some really easy ways to mess up mountains. So these are some things you're going to want to avoid. First of all, mountains don't occur randomly, like, oh, there's a mountain here, there's a mountain there. They do occur in chains, so keep that in mind. You get a chain of mountains, and kind of like a spine in the back of your continent. And they don't march in straight lines. They do tend to curve back and forth just slightly. Again, get out your atlas, get out your maps, study mountains, how they work, and try to follow that sort of natural flow that they have, and yours will start to look real as well. Another thing you don't want to do is just start slapping them down wherever. You want to start working with any stamps, not just your mountain ones, from the top to the bottom of your map, so that your overlays look natural and you aren't messing it up by stamping on top of stamps you've already put down. Start at the top, work your way down, and you're golden. Alright, so first thing, we're going to start a new layer. You can never have too many layers. Start as many new layers as you can. You can always combine layers later. That's easy to do, but it's possible to have too few. So, mountains layer on top of our land layer down here. I've got my stamp ready. Okay, make sure my color is a nice dark, rich, mountainy color. Okay, now because this is meant to be more of an island than a continent, really, I'm going to make these mountains rather large. And that's something you can decide. If you want them to be more to scale, to show how big the land is, you can have really small mountains if you want. It's just a matter of how you want it to end up looking. Make sure you mix up your stamps, because if you don't do that, it's going to start looking like a repeated pattern. I mean, that's not terrible, but it is going to give your map some variety if your mountains have variation and don't all look uniform. If you want to give your map a little interesting perspective, you can start your mountains at the top smaller and gradually make them get larger as you work your way down, and that sort of gives it a faux 3D look, almost as if you're looking at your land from an angle rather than from a straight down perspective. For now, I'm going to keep it simple by just letting my mountains stay the same. But I have seen that work, and it is a very cool effect. I'm going to throw in some random single mountains here and there to start breaking up the pattern, making them look a little bit more natural. Something the mountains do is they don't just rise up out of nowhere. They do tend to taper off on the sides and at the ends of the chains, so that you sort of get a hilly country around the mountains. Now this isn't always true, but it's a general rule of thumb. They do taper off. So I'm going to have some smaller mountains branching off of these to give that sort of effect of the mountains slowly falling into the land. Okay, so I've got all my mountains put down. As you can see, I finished off this chain, and I put a smaller one along the southern rim of this island. Something you want to keep in mind about islands is that they really are just mountains that are rising up out of the sea. So a lot of times when you have a mountain chain on land, on a larger piece of land, you're going to have it continued in the islands themselves, which is why I've got this chain coming off here, as this particular mountain chain continues on into the ocean. And, you know, it wouldn't hurt to add some mountains down here as well, to kind of give the idea that this chain doesn't just necessarily stop at the coastline. It does continue on into the ocean. So that's something to bear in mind when you are originally mapping your land out. Alright, so there's our mountains. We've got the backbones of this particular land all put down, and now we're going to work on the next big feature, which is rivers. And rivers are such an important part of your world. They dictate what areas are going to be better for crops and therefore better for humans to live in, and which areas are going to be drier. They are the blood vessels of the land in the same way that the mountains are the bones. So they carry water, fresh water, usually out of the mountains to the sea. A lot of times it's easy to think that rivers flow from the sea into the land, but it's actually the other way around, so do keep that in mind. Water often starts in the mountains, so I like to have a lot of my rivers coming out of the mountains and going into the sea. Now, to do this, I like to go back to my eraser, just like we did with the coastlines. Take my eraser, get a very small, hard brush, okay, and if you are working with a graphics tablet that is pressure sensitive, that's great, that's ideal, because the thing about rivers is they do tend to taper off. And if you have a pressure sensitive pen, that's going to be really useful. If you don't, you might have to work a little bit harder at this and making your rivers taper off. It'll take a little bit more time. So, even though rivers do flow outward to the sea, I like to draw them inward, starting at the coastline and working my way in. I'm going to start a little bit larger, and I like to look for areas where it makes sense for a river to be. For example, over here I've got the sea already coming into the land a little bit. It looks like a great starting point for a river to be. So I'm going to just take this bay and then make sure I have my land layer selected, because that's what I'm erasing. I'm just going to start working my way inland. Rivers tend to curve, of course, they aren't straight lines. Draw it up into the mountains here, where I'm going to zoom in so I can start getting detailed with my river. So lightly just trace it up there and let it disappear on up there in the mountains. Very good. And you know, they do branch off, and where rivers join, always keep in mind they get fatter because you've got more water collecting here. Often that's a good place for a swamp to occur if you're looking for that. I'm going to have this little channel disappear into the mountains as well. There we go. Making sure I don't draw over the mountains completely so that it looks like it's disappearing into them. Up here I've got a sort of jagged edge, definitely river material. Take a big bend. Again, the best thing you can do to prepare for this is to look at actual maps of rivers and see how they work. One feature about rivers that I really love to include, and not too much, but every now and then, are our deltas. And a delta, of course, is the mouth of a river where it empties into a larger body of water, like the ocean or a bay or a lake, and the water kind of has eroded that land away because there's so much of it flowing through that it starts to cut all these different channels into the water, and that's a great thing to include to really make your river look realistic. It's also a great ideal place for maybe a city to crop up, but watch out for floods because so much water in this area with rising tides, just all kinds of different details to keep in mind as you're world building to keep it realistic. Throw in a river down here. These are easy to change if you need to suit the purposes of your story. Rivers make for great barriers between lands. They make for great sources of wars, battling for the commerce that goes up and down them. There's no fantasy world is complete without a few good rivers to spice things up. Okay, we've got mountains, we've got rivers. We are well on our way to having a fully developed, realized map of this fantasy island. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll be back for tutorial number 3, in which I believe we're going to start getting into more details such as forests, swamps, and some of the other land features that are going to be vital to the success of this map. Thank you for watching. Again, if you have questions, ask in the comments, or you can email me at authorjesscorey@gmail.com.